In the last hours before dawn, Thebes holds its breath. The city, a heaving labyrinth of stone and shadow, sprawls beneath a desert sky streaked with indigo and sickle moon silver. Along the riverbanks, clumps of papyrus whisper in cold breezes that drift up from the Nile, their stalks bowing as if in fear. Within the sacred enclosure of the Temple of Mut, the darkness presses closer, more suffocating, thickened by the residue of centuries. Even the air feels heavy, saturated with the lingering perfume of burning myrrh and a faint metallic undertone impossible to name and harder to banish. The limestone walls, etched by the work of forgotten artisans, drip with a slow condensation. Somewhere in the depths, water from the holy pools seeps and trickles, the sound echoing endlessly, never finding a natural end. Above the temple's entrance, jackal-headed guardians of black basalt stare down at the faithful who rarely look up, their eyes reflecting the pale light of dying lanterns. Time here moves differently, marked by torchlight and the thrum of distant drums instead of passing hours. It is the festival of Aniket, in the 312th year before the Christian reckoning, and Thebes stands under the rule of Ptolemy I, the foreign king whose soldiers sleep uneasily on Egyptian soil. Here in the temple precinct, the city's turbulence feels impossibly distant. Only the will of the gods reigns inside these walls. Only their hunger is absolute. In a side chamber walled with granite and watched over by painted falcons, 7 girls shrouded in linen wait, perfectly silent save for the tightness of their breathing and the muffled rustle of nervous fingers twisting strands of cloth. Their shadows melt into the fluted columns, bodies pressed together for reassurance. But the lingering incense turns each exhale into a fresh reel of anxiety. The smell reminds one, Neithara, her face marked by last night's tears, of embalming rituals she has only glimpsed from afar. The cloying herbal sweetness smuggled in by the priests to mask what lies beneath. The torches along the chamber's perimeter gutter as the inner doors swing open, ancient hinges shrieking in protest. From the blackness beyond, 4 priests emerge, bearing oil lamps that paint their smooth, shaven skulls in gold and obsidian. Their linen robes are stiff with ritual oils and stained deep along the fringes, a tapestry of pomegranate and ochre that no servant dares ask about. High Priest Bekranef stands in their midst, as severe and unyielding as the carved deities above him. His eyes never settle on the girls, instead drifting to the ceiling, where plumes of incense coil like the breath of some buried beast. In his left hand, he clutches a tablet of polished obsidian, its edge sharp enough to draw blood. The hieroglyphs etched there burn with purpose. As he speaks, his voice is low but unwavering, each syllable competing with the grind of ancient mechanisms, the distant thump of the ceremonial drums, and the ghosts of innumerable offerings. By sunrise, he begins, gesturing with solemn finality, the waters of the Nile will be nourished with your rebirth. Purity is demanded. Anuket herself thirsts for it. His words tumble through the gloom, the syllables hard as thrown stones. Something flutters in Neithara's chest. Something frantic that struggles against the barrier of her ribs and roots her in place. Her fingertips tingle with cold sweat. The priest's voice seems to come from everywhere at once, amplified by the alcoves and the low, monstrous hum of chanting that is rising just beyond the walls. With every phrase, the world constricts. The air thickens, the sweat chills, the burning scent swells like a living thing. A new, sharper note mingles with the resin and oil. Blood, barely hidden. Neithara's teeth clench against the taste that seems to settle on her tongue. She looks down. Across her bare feet, the stone is cool, slickened by the remains of some unguent. One of the girls sways, her knees buckling, but the hand on Neithara's arm offers neither comfort nor reprieve. No one has spoken a word since their waking. Their names, their griefs, are unspoken here, irrelevant in the face of what has been promised. A flicker of movement. Bekranef presses his thumb to the obsidian, the dark stone betraying a gleam of red. The gesture is both promise and warning, his own offering to the goddess, and a signal that the night's quiet cannot last. Crickets outside chirp once, stutter, then fall silent. The city is holding its breath with the girls now. In this moment, as the oil lamps tremble and the first wave of chanting surges from the sanctuary, Neithara feels her hope shrivel, replaced by something older than faith. The certainty that what is about to happen will not cleanse her soul, but mark it beyond recognition. Before sunrise in Thebes, a girl who had never spoken outside prayer begs the gods for death. The dark is absolute, and the waiting worse than anything ritual could deliver. Thebes, once the heart of Egypt, shimmers uneasily on the edge of old greatness and new fear. It is the late 4th century before the Christian era. a moment when the world here is shifting beneath sand and ambition. The city's avenues lined with battered sphinxes whose faces have softened in the relentless sun, thud with the footfalls of both Egyptian priests and Hellenic soldiers. Ptolemy I Soter, Alexander's former general, now rules as pharaoh, but the old blood does not welcome the new. Temples are no longer untouchable sanctuaries. Foreign scribes haunt the marketplaces, trading cedar and wine for secrets, while local priests walk with heads bowed and eyes wary of betrayal. It is a time when power is measured in the stone deposits of temple treasuries and the number of golden statues still gleaming in the shrines. The priests of Thebes are consumed with desperate rituals, grasping to retain divine favor as their ancient authority crumbles. The once sacred Nile flows under a strange banner, and rumors trickle through the city, whispered words that the gods are less patient, less kind than they were before. Famine and coughs spread among the poor, but the priesthood proclaims purity, the only protection against chaos. Every temple virgin chosen in these years embodies Thebes' fragile hope, but most are too young to truly understand what is asked of them. Bekranef presides over this world with the serenity of someone accustomed to wielding fear. At 62, the high priest knows how shadows lengthen with each lost offering. Lean and bitter, he regards the changing cityscape with contempt, his trust not in kings, but in old curses and the iron weight of tradition. Bekranef's faith is uncompromising. He believes the gods are starving, and only pain will restore their favor. Every morning, he moves through the precinct with his obsidian tablet in hand, a personal record of rituals and doctrines, some half erased by earlier, softer scribes, most committed only in secret. Bekranef's authority is both revered and feared. He holds the balance between drought and rain, sickness and healing, with the brutality of a zealot who believes mercy is a weakness of foreign invaders. Among the virgins cloistered in the inner sanctum, Neithara feels the weight of generations on her narrow shoulders. 16 years old, she is known for her devotion, her capacity for meditation and self-denial envied even by elder priestesses. Her eyes, sharp as river glass, darken with every ritual. She understands little of the world outside these walls but senses the danger pulsating beneath the prayers. Hope flickers in her soul each morning, flaring for moments before the endless ceremonies extinguish them anew. She is not alone. 6 other girls, ranging from 13 to 17, cling to sacred customs in the desperate hope that their suffering will protect their families from hunger and the priests from exile. These girls know that if the rituals fail, the curse will not just strike their temple. It will ripple out into marketplaces, fields, and the bones of their own kin. Ptolemy, meanwhile, drapes himself in Greek philosophy and Eastern ornaments. Indifferent to the deeper agonies of Thebes, his attention rests on soldiers and administrators, on the taxes extracted and the cities he keeps from open rebellion. He visits the temple rarely, his presence more threat than blessing. For Bekranef, Ptolemy is an interloper permitted on sacred ground, tolerated only so long as he allows the priesthood to retain some semblance of power. The tension between king and priest is a feverish current, felt in every whispered negotiation and every ritual made harsher to appease crumbling faith. Out of sight, Sennefer works by smoky lamplight, scribe to the high priest but restless with doubts. At 35, his skill with hieratic script is matched by a secret hunger for truth. Each day as he copies decrees, he listens closer, certain that the rituals he records are becoming more savage, less symbolic. He preserves bits of forbidden knowledge in code and double meaning, storing scraps of warnings inside clay jars buried beneath his workshop. Sometimes he wonders if his careful rebellion is futile, if any evidence will survive the wrath of both priest and king. The core struggle unfolds in those temple chambers. Priests fighting to preserve a sacred order even as the world conspires to destroy it. Virgins sacrificing futures for a deliverance no one is sure will come. Should the rituals fail? Should famine spread unchecked or divine favor be doubted? The priesthood knows Ptolemy's men will seize their lands and consign their gods to the dust. If they succeed, they will hold Thebes' fate in blood-gilded hands, proving their authority to rulers neither loving nor Egyptian. The cost, measured in bodies and silence, rises with every new moon. Each prayer becomes a wager, each sacrifice a brutal affirmation that Thebes stands, if only temporarily, between old gods and new death. As the city's moon waxes full and the delicate border between dusk and dawn blurs, the girl's initiation begins in earnest. First with the purity oath, a trial that marks the threshold of transformation. In the pre-dawn gloom, as the temple's jackal guardians watch from atop chipped pedestals and dust swirls in narrow shafts of lamplight, Neithara and her companions are gathered near the sacred basin, its surface gleaming with a liquid blackness that hides what lies beneath. The priests recite verses from obsidian tablets, their incantations threaded by the slow, pulsing rhythm of drums. The air thickens, the scent of smoked frankincense stings the nose, and the chilled droplets of holy water prickle their skin. One by one, the girls drink from the ancient vessel, its rim stained dark from centuries of ritual. Their visions splinter. The incense lulls them, the timbre of the priests' voices growing monstrous in their ears, while Neithara, her sight strips away certainty and fear roots itself deeper. With little warning, the girls are ushered toward the hidden chamber below. Stone flights spiral downward into the temple's bowels, each corner marked by frescoes showing strange metamorphoses. Virgins devoured and then reborn in painted lions, their eyes wide with agony, their forms shifting from mortal to divine. The torches illuminate bronze ritual implements, hooks, blades, and censers, set upon a ceremonial slab, arranged in agonizing symmetry. There is almost no sound at first, save for the scuffing of bare feet against sticky stone and the heavy breathing of girls who realize this is not symbolic, not mere rite, but ordeal. It is here, far from the city's clamor, that the myth of purification ruptures. Here, Neithara discovers the edge where faith becomes terror. By the third day, the exhalation ceremony commences. Locked in a narrow vault at the heart of the sanctuary, the girls' bodies grow limp as the air saturates with floral smoke, lotus and hyssop, sprinkled by priests with hands like claws, until reason falters and silence reigns. The intention is not death, but a simulated passage. Only those who recover, who return breath to their bodies unaided, are deemed worthy. The sweet-smelling haze quickly turns acrid, seeping into lungs, scraping the throat raw. Neithara alternates between consciousness and void, fragments of childhood and pain flickering past her mind's eye. The sensation of suffocation overwhelms the senses. Sight dims, sound tunnels into sharp buzzing. Taste and smell meld into a sickening sweetness on the tongue. As hours pass, the priests monitor from behind the carved screens, their measured patience a cold mockery of mercy. It is only by the narrowest margin that Neithara emerges, her eyes now haunted and speech lost to dread. In the midst of these rites, the scribe Sennefer becomes an unwilling witness to worsening brutality. From his alcove veiled in ragged papyrus and candlelight, he transcribes the high priest's words, but secretly records the cries and oaths of both victim and perpetrator, storing them in coded fragments beneath the altar. Each night, Sennefer's fear gnaws at him, the knowledge that discovery will mean not exile, but annihilation. His hands shake while copying the forbidden doctrine. Every sweep of the reed brush feels like a burial, an unmarked grave to memories he is powerless to save. He dares to defy in small ways, passing a fragment to a Greek envoy, a desperate hope for intervention flickering in the thickening gloom. But Bekranef's eyes are everywhere, and Sennefer's resistance sows disaster. By dawn, his rebellion is exposed. He is seized and anointed by those who once trusted him, his body prepared for the ultimate cleansing. The bloodletting is precise, deliberate, a grim offering meant to preserve the scribe's words in eternity. Neithara, forced to observe, stares as her sole ally is stripped of his human attributes and reduced to a passage in forbidden scripture, the lifeblood trickling across cold stone toward the feet of the veiled goddess. The high priest's words echo, "Only the pure can last in memory." For Neithara, revelation and horror entwine in knots that choke both mind and soul. Faced with annihilation, Neithara's fear mutates to resolve. That very night, guided by only the wavering moonlight and the distant crash of river water, she stumbles through the labyrinthine catacombs, slipping past lingering sentinels whose torches fail to pierce the corridor's winding blackness. Hope flickers. A profound act of survival. She uncovers the scribe's secret cache, a crumbling stack of scrolls scrawled in shaky hieratic script, hiding beneath a shattered statue. The past trauma rings sharper knowing each word. Every bloody mark was etched by one just as desperate as she for sanctuary. Yet pursuit is relentless. Priestly voices echo in the tunnels, whether real or conjured by smoke and terror is impossible to know. Above ground, Thebes does not rest. Priests seal the temple after Neithara's escape. Famine intensifies, and the city begins to rot from fear as much as hunger. Graffiti appears on dry walls, painted messages marking a girl who fled the gods. The high priest, now more specter than man, claims Thebes' agony as divine retribution for the lost virgin. The cycle of suffering and silence built on blood and bone has reached its fevered knot. In these moments, it is not supernatural wrath that grips Thebes, it is the human hand, merciless, desperate, convinced that only pain restores order. If these accounts have left you transfixed by the buried realities of Egypt's temples, consider joining the Epoch Ensemble. Subscribe and help us continue to unearth what was meant to be lost in shadow, revealing the voices erased by fear and stone. But our descent into the hidden horrors of Thebes is not yet finished. Beneath this living silence, new revelations await, clawing upward through sand, bone, and forgotten ink. Centuries thunder past, and the stones of Thebes remember what living voices cannot. The temple that once echoed with rites now sits lost beneath the sediment of politics, eclipse, and sandstorm, a fortress of secrets almost surrendered to oblivion. Yet, Egypt's past is never truly silent, and history has its way of clawing back what was buried. In the searing summer of 1897, the British Egyptologist Margaret Benson arrived at the Mut precinct driven by rumors swirling through European universities. Whispers of vanished virgins, ritual bones, and rites so cryptic even the most seasoned priests disavowed them. Her team scoured the ruined enclosure, dust swirling in eddies as their tools scraped at the stubborn ground. The temple's foundations, fractured by centuries of floods and sun, yielded little at first. But then, as if conjured by persistence alone, a split chamber gave way, a sealed crypt untouched since the age of Ptolemy. The air within was heavier, bitter to the taste, pungent with a residue that no wind had carried in living generations. At the heart of the gloom, the archaeologists unearthed a cluster of bone fragments, their surfaces pitted and dark but unmistakably human. There were jars too, inscribed with angular hieratic script, fading russet with time and etched with sinister invocations. The team cataloged everything, photographers capturing details that some claimed blurred at the edges, as if the evidence itself recoiled from sunlight. Among these relics lay the shattered remains of what had once been ritual tools, bronze hooks, obsidian shards, and ceremonial blades blackened at the hilt and edge. The finds seemed designed not for homage but for transformation and agony. Radiocarbon analysis performed decades later would confirm the estimate. These bones belonged to the dying years of the 4th century BCE, matching precisely the year of renewal the scribe Sennefer chronicled in forbidden script. What these findings proved was chilling. The sacrifices remembered in myth and dismissed in legend had been all too real, their victims aged, marked, and mutilated as ritual demanded. The documentary trail extended beyond the Nile's embrace and Thebes's ruins. In London's British Museum, curators puzzled over papyrus fragments describing the lungs offering, a ceremony where breath was stolen and returned. Their brittle pages echoed with references to vessels of virgins offered in clouded breath, words that painted fear in the margins, revealing ritual as ordeal, not celebration. Decades before, an 1822 Vatican letter penned by the missionary Joseph Moncrief recounted Egyptian rites that mimic Eucharist but through torment, judged unspeakable even by clergy accustomed to horror. Such testimonies do not rest easily in the archives. They are buried behind layers of denial, disguised by alternative translations. Other Greek records, like those of Claudius Aelian, hint at rituals too obscene to chronicle, coded in euphemism to protect both writer and reader from the actual wound of truth. The trail does not end on parchment or bone. There are traces left in the stones themselves. In 1903, while cataloging the lower annex, Egyptian laborers and European overseers documented intentional sealings of the southern chambers, the walls plastered thickly and marked with symbols of jackals and hearts. The seals were not the work of age or accident. They had been placed deliberately, meant to hide what transpired behind them. A burial not of bodies but of collective memory. Inscriptions, when finally translated, betrayed the priesthood's panic. Lines reading, "She fled the gods, and impurity sealed in stone." Why had these truths been buried so meticulously, smothered in seal and silence? The answer rises through dust and reason. Under the Ptolemies, Egypt's priesthood desperately reinvented itself. In a world where foreign kings seized every opportunity to claim the mystical and divine, evidence of sacred cruelty could not survive. It had to be erased, the history rewritten, so future generations would never ask, never know that ritual pain and purity were sometimes indistinguishable, that the gods whom the priests invoked demanded a toll none could justify in daylight. Yet, as historians and archaeologists probe deeper, the magnitude of what was hidden grows more formidable. These discoveries matter not only for the record but for the voices they restore, Girls whose names never appeared in scrolls, but whose bones tell stories even granite cannot outlast. Each artifact, each faded line of script, is a challenge thrown at centuries of silence. To reckon with horror, not as myth or nightmare, but as a legacy conspired into the bedrock. History itself stands accused, forced to acknowledge that olive branch peace and papyrus prayer often grow from the same soil as secrets, suffering, and dust. And as the epoch turns once more, every finding, every record surfaced, is a rebuke against forgetting. A testament that what is most shameful is what civilizations work hardest to erase. In the wake of revelation, the world of Thebes changed, not with the suddenness of collapse, but with the slow corrosion of faith, memory, and power. What began as hidden ritual in the heart of a locked temple spilled outwards, infecting the currents of Egyptian society like a poison too subtle for most to see. The immediate aftermath was confusion. A land already trembling under the weight of Greek pharaohs and drought pressed further by rumors leaking from the Mut precinct. Priests once revered as agents of divine will now became objects of suspicion, their authority trembling in the face of what could not be explained. The living city responded with silence and superstition. Merchants sold salt and amulets promising protection from the curse of the vanished maiden. Faint-hearted mothers tugged their daughters from the temple squares, muttering prayers not found in any liturgy. Hunger deepened. The Nile's floods failed to arrive, or when they did, they brought disease and rot instead of abundance. The politics of the moment shifted with ruthless calculation. Ptolemy I, always vigilant for cracks in the foundation of his new kingdom, seized the temple lands and hearts of the priesthood while omitting any reference to sacrificial abominations in his records. A cold contract was struck. The priests would be permitted their shrines and liturgies, so long as their rituals left no trace, no consequence. Thebes' spiritual core was hollowed out, contagious fear driving a wedge between people and their ancient guardians. The trappings of faith remained: festivals, hymns, the parade of painted gods each solstice, but the vows that once bound priest and supplicant rotted at their roots. Where trust once bloomed, now suspicion grew like desert thorns. Yet the consequences ricocheted far beyond Thebes or even Egypt. Soon, echoes of these purity rituals appeared in neighboring lands under new names. The Vestal Virgins in Rome, the Bleeding Priests of Cybele in Anatolia. Each system warped to fit local fears of chaos and the desperation to control fate through suffering. The pattern repeated, relentless as tide. Young bodies marked as vessels of purity, overseen by guardians who were both protectors and predators. The rhetoric remained constant. Purity promised deliverance. Suffering guaranteed favor. But the core, always, was control. In every shrine that flared and every temple that fell silent, priests learned the art of veiling torment in the language of the divine. As decades stretched into centuries, the truth of what happened in Thebes was neither wholly lost nor entire preserved. Instead, it grew in the rich soil of folklore and memory. In villages dotting the Nile's crumbling path, elders told of the Silent Sisters, veiled phantoms glimpsed along temple ruins at dusk, said to be the restless souls of the chosen virgins. They whispered that before drought or plague, the ghosts would circle the temple walls, their heads bowed not in prayer, but in mourning, voices forever silenced before the gods they had once served. These legends endured, growing softer, sadder, shaped by collective guilt. Even as the stories blurred into myth and shepherds laughed them off by the campfire, the old dread never truly faded. Modern historians, sifting through the silt of centuries, have gradually pieced together the unvarnished horror behind these stories. Papyrus records once dismissed as superstition have been reevaluated in the light of physical evidence. The bones torn and asymmetric, the obsidian shards stained with secrets. Where previous textbooks described initiatory rites or sacred purification, new voices demand accuracy and accountability. They unveil the lengths to which the powerful went to erase their crimes, to recast calculated cruelty as transcendent experience. The lesson of Thebes in scholarly hands is a caution against trusting any narrative too clean or convenient. History, it turns out, is written not only by the victors but also by those who have most to hide. Yet perhaps the greatest impact remains the silence itself, the fact that for thousands of years, voices that might have warned or mourned or explained were carefully snuffed out. Their only legacy, the faint echo on stone, the numb ache that lingers when history's darkness refuses to yield. The cost of that silence is incalculable. shaping every civilization that chose to look away or build memory only from what survived the flames. Thebes teaches us that horrors hidden by order and ritual may still hold sway long after the last priest falls, shaping cultures that inherit the myth but forget the blood. In funerary temples and modern libraries, the lesson endures. What is omitted from the stories we tell is almost always what we need most to remember. The stone still whispers, not in forgiveness, but in warning. The legacy of Thebes is tangled, buried, and as alive as the dread itself. In the hush that follows revelation, Thebes, even as a ruin, even as a recollection in brittle papyrus and colder stone, demands something more than understanding. It demands a reckoning with the grief of the vanished, the complicity of the powerful, the silence of the many, and the cost by which civilization carves order from chaos. The bodies pulled from those crypts leave questions that cannot be reconciled by ritual or reworded away by myth. Instead, they beg us to see each ancient brick and fragment not merely as relic but as witness, a custodian of what the world tried hardest to erase. Thebes' story is not simply one of suffering, but of a society forever teetering on the precipice between salvation and self-destruction, its custodians convinced that only through control and sacrifice could their world survive another year, another season. They were wrong, and the aftermath stretches far wider than any one city or creed. The immediate repercussions rippled outward, warping not just Egypt but every culture that heard even whispers of the rituals. Priests elsewhere learned both the frailty of their own positions and the power in secrecy. Entire generations of supplicants would find themselves either driven by or destroyed under the demand for purity. Thebes' particular darkness, though, was made immortal not simply in fear, but in the tenacious way its memory burrowed into folklore, legend, and finally, after centuries of denial, history's bright cold light. For every youth vanished into some temple's silence, there were mothers who wept and disbelieved, laborers who built walls with curses muttered beneath their breath, and children who grew up hearing that a misstep in ritual could have consequences deeper than mere death. Mortality was not the worst fate. Being lost, unmourned, and forgotten, hollowed out for the convenience of the godly, was a punishment that no afterlife could amend. What marks out Thebes from countless other lost civilizations is not just the brutality of its rites, but the way its echoes persist. Stories of the silent sisters, of the maiden who fled divine grasp, of the scribe who tried to preserve the truth at risk of his own blood. These did not fade when the stones crumbled, or when Greek kings wrote new laws. They flickered on, like unquenchable embers, fueling the stories told on riverbanks, among merchants, in the cautious half-prayers of the broken-hearted. Even as textbooks skipped over the specifics, preferring elegance to horror, euphemism to witness, the myths ensured that shame and pain found other ways to survive. Thebes' ancient chants and secret blood ceremonies haunted the peripheries of faith and memory, a permanent reminder that what is beautiful or celestial can just as easily be a shroud for cruelty, and the reckoning does not belong to the past alone. Archaeologists, scholars, even skeptical descendants confronted by the undeniable evidence in clay, bone, and wall must decide what to carry into the future. Whether to relegate what happened to the murk of initiation and sacred drama, or finally grant the lost their due as humans, not merely as shadows beneath ritual. The legacy of Thebes, in its cruelest clarity, is the warning that forgetting is not a neutral act but a choice with teeth. For every generation that chooses silence over honesty, another darkness is nurtured, another chorus of pain inherited. Only by listening to the voices unearthed, by letting them disturb the stories we tell about power, purity, and the cost of belonging, can we ensure the same horrors are not summoned again under new banners, in new sanctuaries, with fresh names inscribed over old wounds. In the end, what remains is not triumph or tragedy, but a throb of unease, an electric awareness that our civilization, with all its wisdom and institutions, stands upon the same fragile border. In their silence, the temple's lost virgins still speak, through the stone, the scroll, the haunted dreams of those who dare to seek them out. Their story is not over because the lesson is not learned. The cost of cleansing one evil is too often paid in the birth of another. Thebes' echo lingers in the pause between questions and answers, in the longing for justice that history postpones but never quite erases. So tell us, what struck you most about the vanished voices beneath Thebes? Which forgotten figure or forbidden order should we bring to light next, together? For as long as there are secrets buried in stone and suffering concealed by the words of the powerful, Epoch Ensemble will be here, to peel back every silence, to haunt every gap in the record, to listen for the cries that history tried to smother. Subscribe, join us, and help carry these legacies forward. The lamps of Mut's temple went out 2,000 years ago. Their shadows, however, have never left us. When the dust of history finally settles and the shadows stretch thin across the ancient stones, the question that hangs in the air is not simply, what happened here? But rather, why did it have to be hidden? Thebes, once the axis of divine and mortal ambition, is now a grave for both memory and myth, a territory where truth and denial have warred for centuries, and the echoes of that struggle haunt even the summer wind. Long after the priests have faded into dust and the names of the virgins have surrendered to erosion, their legacy persists in ways more subtle and poignant than mere records, etched into the collective unease of every people who ever trembled at the prospect of being consumed by the very institutions they prayed to for deliverance. There is a specific sorrow in learning that suffering was sanctified, that the promise of purity could serve as a mask for brutality. That sorrow radiates outward from every artifact, every inscription that warns, not just of what was done, but who was left to disappear. The tragedy of Thebes lies not only in the bodies lost or blood spilled, but in the silence that followed. The complicity of those who looked away, the dread in generations who sensed danger but dared not name it. In trying to ensure their own survival, the priests fashioned a world in which death was not the end, but a means to a more chilling continuation. A silence that would swallow even the faintest protest, a ritual so thorough it erased itself. And yet, in that silence, voices persist. They linger in the margins of the oldest papyri, where a scribe's trembling hand recorded more than doctrine, a hint of warning, a plea buried in metaphor. They move like restless spirits in the folklore of Upper Egypt, where villagers even today speak of the ghost maidens who wander temple ruins at dusk, dressed in linens no longer white. Their memory calls to those bold enough to listen, to unflinchingly confront the fact that cruelty, veiled as tradition, is a story as old as civilization and as relevant as tomorrow's headlines. It is the heavy inheritance of every generation that inherited this silence and must choose either to keep carrying it or to break it open. So as you reach the end of this disturbing journey with Epoch Ensemble, pause for a moment in that lingering darkness. Let it settle across your imagination, not to incite fear for fear's sake, but to honor those who can speak only through the record of their suffering. Their fate compels us to ask not what right we have to judge the past, but what obligation we have to remember it honestly. In their pain is a mirror for every system, every society that has justified oppression by invoking something higher, something purer. If we recognize how often righteousness has been wielded as a weapon, then perhaps, in that awareness, we build a defense against the return of such darkness. In their silence, they still whisper. The stones of Thebes remind us, not simply a poetic phrase, but the core of the lesson, that being forgotten is a fate worse than despair, and remembering is its only antidote. The ghosts of the Mut precinct, Neithara, Sennefer, the unnamed, the voiceless, press against history's door not to frighten us, but to remind us that every story left unspoken finds ways to claw free. What struck you most about what remained hidden in Thebes? Which voice, priest, victim, accidental witness, echoed for you in these last moments of unraveling history? Which forbidden tale or overlooked persona, buried by time or decree, calls out to be revealed next? Share your reflections below. Your perspective joins the thousand-strong chorus striving against history's hush. We ask these questions not just to provoke thought, but to commit, once more, never to let suffering disappear beneath elegant myths or the comfort of forgetting. Epoch Ensemble exists to serve as a lantern in such darkness, threading these stories together, listening for every echo, refusing to accept silence where truth hungers to speak. For more of the world's hidden tragedies and the lives turned by their shadows, subscribe and step with us into the labyrinth. The more who gather beneath this banner, the safer these stories become from exile. In every subscription, in every shared thought, you help give the voiceless a second chance at being heard. As the last echoes fade and the ancient city sinks into dusk once more, let one memory linger. The lamps of the Mut temple went out 2,000 years ago, but through your listening and your willingness to confront the darkness, they are, for a moment, rekindled, their light unyielding, their truth unafraid.